Hello, this is Morris Mazinga reporting for the Cartoon Art Gallery. I'm here with Dr. John Lent, and I just wanted to say hello and thank you for coming to the Middle East. And so tell me a little bit about yourself and then maybe what brought you to the Middle East.
Right. Well, I'm a retired professor. I taught for 51 years in the United States and Canada, China, Philippines, Malaysia. I've done a lot of writing, books and articles, and I've been interested in cartooning and comics for a number of years, actually from childhood, and have been building up a comic studies profession in the United States through organizations I've organized and also through the International Journal of Comic Art, which I started. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. I'm here for two reasons. One is to give a couple lectures or speeches at the Asian Media and Information and Communication Conference, which is held every year in some part of the world. And secondly, because I found out about the Cartoon Art Gallery and thought it was a pretty unique place, and I'd like to come and look at it, and also to maybe give a lecture and talk to a bunch of cartoonists. And I've been doing that. I've been treated very well. Mel and Chitra and Lori have been very good in making me feel comfortable. So that's why I'm here.
In your lecture the other night, one of your main focuses was Asian comics.
Right.
So I was just wondering what started you on that path, and maybe a little bit about that.
Okay, well, I started studying Asian mass media back in the 1960s. I had a Fulbright to go to the Philippines in 1964 and 65. And while I was there, I gathered information on media by interviewing editors, broadcasters, filmmakers, etc., and wrote a book that is still used as a textbook in the Philippines, I'm told. So that first trip to the Philippines, I fell in love with the Philippines and with Asian cultures. The Philippines was a fantastic place at the time because it was like the Wild West of the United States back in the 1880s. You go sit at a bar and there would be a security guard sitting next to you drinking beer with a submachine gun on the counter and all of that type of thing. And the corruption was everywhere, but it was a lot of fun. So I became interested at that time. And also, and then after that, I think I've made 80 or 90 trips to Asia since that time.
So the comics, how did the comic focus?
Well, the comics, I was interested in comics since I was a kid, and a lot of that came from my father, because my father read the newspaper strips every day, very religiously. I think he received a lot of knowledge from the strips. He had an 8th grade education, was a railroader, as the whole family was. They were railroaders or coal miners. And, at times you would hear all these sayings, and I always thought, man, this 8th grade educated person really comes up with some clever sayings. And some of them I found later on he got from the comic strips, like horse feathers and words like that. But he also was very clever in making up his own quips. And so then when I was at Syracuse University in 1963, working on a doctorate, which didn't take, so I had to finish it about 10 years later, because I wrote a book critical of the man who pumped money into Syracuse University. But while I was there was this whole Frederick Wortham craze that comic books were dangerous to children, etc. And so I did a little experiment with fourth graders and tried to determine if they read a comic book that was a little bit violent, would that change their personalities? It was a failed experiment, mainly because the fourth graders were sharper than I was. When I would ask them how many comic books did you read a week, they'd say 4,361 or 2,000. So whatever. So they really contaminated the data, but I did find a few things out from that. So, you know, and then gradually over the years, I became more interested. There weren't many people interested in studying comics in the 60s or 70s. You could count them on one hand and have 2 or 3 fingers left over. I mean, that few. And then in the 1980s, I really started spending most of my time studying comics. And I started working on I'd written articles, and then 1986, Hungarian cartoonist and I started a magazine called Witty World, and Witty World was a comic. It was a magazine that featured artwork, comic artwork from artists around the world, and also articles, but not scholarly-like. They were more popular press-like, and it became a pretty successful magazine. And we printed, I think, 21 copies plus 10 bulletins of that. So by that time, in 1980s, my interest was peaked. I mean, I now knew this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. And so then I started some groups to, you know, pull academics together globally, and started interviewing a lot of cartoonists. It started in Malaysia, interviewing Lot, who has become a very good friend over the years, and he's always a very good cartoonist. And then, I've interviewed probably 700 or so cartoonists and animators, including many of the most important in all these countries I've been to. So, and then in the 1990s, late 80s and 90s, I started encouraging my Ph.D. students to do their dissertations on comics and cartoons and animation, and so about 12 of them worked on comics and animation from, I don't know, maybe 7 or 10 countries.
Okay. So, I mean, so by the time you got to the Philippines, you had already decided that comics was what you're going to do, and
not when I got to the Philippines. I was more interested in the whole broad field of mass communications, especially international mass communications. But you know, after I would say it really started to develop more fully in the 70s. I was living in Malaysia from 72 to 74, so I was there at a time when some of the first successful comic books were coming out, and you know, developed an interest.
You've come to the Middle East, and you did a little lecture for us the other night. You've had some students and some, you said, some budding artists who are just willing to get some advice, and I don't know, what is your take on some of the art styles? What's the, you know, maybe some advice for some of these artists that are like looking for a way into comics?
Well, first of all, this is, except for Egypt, this is the only country where I've done, in the Middle East, where I've done interviews. I don't think you can call Iran Middle East, but I've been to Iran 4 times, and and talked to many of the cartoonists there, and found that there are many women cartoonists and very, very good cartoonists. In the Western world, we don't know much about cartooning in the Middle East, except when a cartoonist is punished, or, you know, we know about Ali Fazad in Syria and people like that, but you don't hear much. As far as I know, there's been one book written on the Middle East cartoons that actually was called Arab Comics, and that was 25 years or more ago. So, what I'm doing is to try to find out as much as I can about cartooning and comics in this part of the world. And I was very surprised when I knew I was coming to here. I started looking for cartooning on the internet, cartooning in the Emirates or in Dubai, and I didn't find anything the first time. Then the second time I looked, I found the Cartoon Art Gallery, and I saw the photos, and I was amazed at how much was here. And so I wrote a to whom it may concern type of letter, and never expected anyone would answer it. And then Chitra did answer and invited me to give a lecture. So, you know, I was very happy about that. And I've seen the work of maybe 10 or more people.
It's really tough for people to be politically minded in their artwork here. I think you'd said how people needed to kind of make a group and test the envelope, keep testing the boundaries a little bit at a time, or, you know, a lot of people were saying that the line is drawn and the line is vague for a reason, right. And you had said that was kind of like how Chairman Mao set up his establishment. You keep the line vague, right. And it's hard for people to know where the boundaries are. And it's kind of that same situation here with a lot of artists. But, you know, I did agree with what you said about banding together. There's a few groups that are doing that. They're trying to make a group, a collaborative of artists. Anything else you could say to that about the...
Well, I said some of that at the lecture the other night. I think it's very important. I think one of the biggest advantages of the internet is not that it now allows you to draw online or color online, but I think it's because it now allows artists and cartoonists around the world to network. And you know, when I started interviewing cartoonists mainly in the 80s and 90s, all over Asia, they didn't know, you know, in other cities in their own country, they didn't know the cartoonists. Now you talk to these artists and they know people all over the world because they're networking, and they're all these syndicates and associations. So what I was saying is that you know, that there should be more networking here, and that they have the facilities of the Cartoon Art Gallery, and maybe you know, set up an association, or as you mentioned, the collectives, where people of like-minded interests could develop some art, some comic art. And you know, it's not just banding together to find where that line is between what you can and cannot do, but it's banding together to think about ideas and marketing, and where you're going to place these works, and setting up exhibitions, all of that. And you have enough people here to do that. I mean, from what I saw the other night, and that's probably just a part of it. So
Very small.